Margaret Blackwood stood at the front of the funeral hall, staring at the coffin that held her only son. Hundreds of people filled the room, crying, whispering, taking pictures. Everyone wanted to see the funeral of Daniel Blackwood, the young billionaire who had died so suddenly. But Margaret wasn't crying. Her hand gripped a brown envelope hidden in her purse. Inside were papers that would stop this funeral. Papers that would expose the truth. At the front, near the coffin, stood Vanessa, Daniel's wife. She sobbed into a microphone. "My darling Daniel was taken too soon. He was my everything." People wiped their eyes. "Poor woman," someone whispered. "At least he left her all his money." Margaret's jaw tightened. The priest began talking about heaven and rest. In 2 minutes they would close the coffin and bury her son. Margaret stood up. Everyone turned to look. The priest stopped talking. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said gently, "would you like to say something?" Margaret walked to the front. Her heels clicked on the marble floor. Click, click, click. The sound echoed in the silent hall. She turned to face the crowd and looked straight at Vanessa. "My son did not die of natural causes," Margaret said, her voice clear and strong. "Daniel was murdered." Gasps filled the room. Someone screamed. Vanessa jumped up, her face white. "Your grief is confusing you." "I am not confused," Margaret cut her off, cold as ice. "I have proof that you, Vanessa, poisoned my son to steal his money." The hall exploded with noise. Reporters rushed forward. People shouted, "Hello friends. Welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? New York? London? Maybe South Africa or Jamaica? We want to know." Margaret wasn't always rich. She wasn't always powerful. 25 years ago, Margaret was just a regular woman married to a kind man named Thomas. Thomas worked as an engineer. Margaret stayed home with their baby son, Daniel. They lived in a small apartment with old furniture and a leaky roof. They didn't have much money, but they were happy. Then one rainy Tuesday, everything changed. Thomas was driving home from work when a truck ran a red light. The crash killed him instantly. He was only 29 years old. Margaret was 26. She had a 1-year-old baby. She had no job. She had no savings. She had no family to help her. Her parents had died when she was young, and Thomas's family blamed her for his death, saying he was working too hard to support her. Everyone expected her to fail. The landlord said, "You'll never make rent. You should move somewhere cheaper." Thomas's boss said, "We can't hire you. You have no experience." Even her neighbors whispered, "Poor thing. She'll end up on the streets." But Margaret looked at baby Daniel sleeping in his crib, and she made a decision. She would not fail. She would not let her son grow up poor and pitted. Margaret took the small life insurance money from Thomas's death, $5,000, and started a business. She bought second-hand furniture, fixed it up, and sold it for profit. She worked while Daniel napped. She worked after he went to bed. She worked every single day without stopping. The first year she made $10,000. The second year, $30,000. The third year she opened a small shop. People laughed. A furniture shop? In this economy? Run by a woman? She'll be bankrupt in 6 months. They were wrong. Margaret had a gift. She could look at a business and see exactly what it needed. She could negotiate better than anyone. She could spot a lie from a mile away. She was smart, tough, and absolutely impossible to fool. By the time Daniel turned 5, Margaret owned 3 shops. By the time he turned 10, she owned a factory. By the time he turned 15, she owned a whole chain of furniture stores across 5 states. And she never stopped. She bought other companies. She invested in technology. She made deals with people in other countries. She became one of the richest women in the world. But with every success, Margaret learned an important lesson. People will lie to you if you have money. They will pretend to be your friend. They will smile to your face and plot behind your back. They will do anything, to take what you have. Margaret learned to trust no one completely. She learned to ask questions. She learned to investigate. She learned to listen to that little voice inside her head that said, "Something's wrong." That voice had saved her business 100 times. It had protected her from cheaters and thieves and fake partners. But there was one person Margaret always trusted completely. One person she never doubted. One person who was more important than all her money and all her companies combined. Daniel. Her son was everything to her. He was why she worked so hard. He was why she built her empire. Every building, every company, every dollar, it was all for him. But Daniel was nothing like his mother. Where Margaret was suspicious, Daniel was trusting. Where Margaret saw danger, Daniel saw opportunity. Where Margaret questioned everyone, Daniel believed the best about people. "Mom, not everyone is out to get us," Daniel would say with a laugh. "Maybe not everyone," Margaret would reply. "But enough people that we need to be careful." Daniel just shook his head. He thought his mother was too paranoid, too controlling, too suspicious. And maybe he was right. Maybe Margaret did see danger where there was none. Maybe years of fighting and struggling had made her too hard. But then again, maybe that little voice inside her head, the one that had saved her so many times before, was trying to warn her about something big, something terrible, something that was about to destroy her whole world. It was a warm spring evening when Daniel came home with stars in his eyes. Margaret was in her home office, working on papers for a new business deal. She heard the front door open and close. Then she heard Daniel's footsteps, fast, excited footsteps running up the stairs. "Mom? Mom, are you home?" Margaret smiled. Daniel was 28 years old, but sometimes he still sounded like a little boy. "In my office, sweetheart." Daniel burst through the door. His face was bright red and he was breathing hard like he'd been running. But he was smiling the biggest smile Margaret had ever seen. "I met someone," he said. Margaret's fingers stopped typing. She looked up at her son. "Someone?" "A woman. Her name is Vanessa." Daniel sat down in the chair across from her desk. His hands moved around as he talked, the way they always did when he was excited. "Mom, she's incredible. She's smart and funny and beautiful and—" "Slow down," Margaret said with a small laugh. "Where did you meet her?" "At the art gallery. You know, the one that opened downtown last month? I went to see the new paintings and she was there too. We started talking about this one painting, a big blue one with stars, and we just connected. We talked for 3 hours, Mom. 3 hours. I didn't even notice the gallery was closing until the security guard asked us to leave." Margaret watched her son's face. She'd seen Daniel date before. There had been other girlfriends, nice girls, most of them. But she'd never seen him look like this. "That sounds lovely," Margaret said carefully. "What does she do for work?" "She's an art consultant. She helps rich people buy paintings and sculptures for their homes and offices. She travels all over the world. She's been to Paris, Tokyo, Dubai, everywhere. An art consultant. Someone who worked with rich people. Someone who knew how to charm them, how to make them spend money." That little voice in Margaret's head whispered, "Be careful." "I'd like to meet her," Margaret said. "You will. I'm seeing her again tomorrow. We're having dinner at that Italian restaurant you like. Maybe you could." "No, not yet," Margaret said quickly. "Give it some time. Get to know her first. Then bring her to meet me." Daniel's smile faded a little. "Mom, don't start." "Start what?" "You know what? That thing you do. Where you investigate everyone I date. Where you find problems with everyone who gets close to me. I just want to make sure. I'm not a child anymore." Daniel stood up. His voice got louder. "I'm 28 years old. I can judge people for myself." "Of course you can," Margaret said calmly. "But there's nothing wrong with being careful. Especially when you're a Blackwood. Especially when you have money. Not everyone cares about money, Mom. Some people just want love. Real love. Like what you had with Dad." Margaret felt a pain in her chest. Daniel was right, she and Thomas had loved each other truly, deeply. But that was before the money. Before the empire. Before everything changed. "Just bring her to dinner soon," Margaret said softly. "Please. For me." Daniel's face softened. "Okay, so, I promise." He left the office and Margaret sat alone with her thoughts. That little voice whispered again, "Something's wrong." But Margaret pushed it away. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe this Vanessa was exactly what she seemed. A nice woman who liked art and happened to meet her son. Maybe. 6 months passed. 6 months of Daniel talking about Vanessa constantly. 6 months of Vanessa said this, and Vanessa thinks that, and Vanessa loves this restaurant. But Margaret still hadn't met her. Every time she asked, Daniel had an excuse. Vanessa was traveling. Vanessa was busy with work. Vanessa was sick. Vanessa was helping her sick mother. The excuses piled up like stones in Margaret's stomach. Finally, one Tuesday afternoon, Daniel came to Margaret's office in the downtown building. He wasn't smiling this time. He looked nervous. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important." Margaret put down her pen. "What is it?" Daniel pulled a small box from his pocket. He opened it. Inside was a diamond ring so big it caught the light and sparkled like a tiny star. "I'm going to ask Vanessa to marry me," Daniel said. "Tonight." Margaret's whole body went cold. Daniel, she said slowly, you've been dating for 6 months. That's not very long. And I still haven't met her. Don't you think you should wait? At least let me meet her first. I knew you'd say that. Daniel's jaw tightened. I knew you'd find a reason for me to wait. But I love her, Mom. I love her more than anything. And she loves me. How do you know? What? How do you know she loves you? Margaret stood up from her desk. Has she ever been to your apartment? Does she know you volunteer at the children's hospital? Does she know you hate fancy parties? Or does she only know about the money? Daniel's face turned red. That's not fair. It's a fair question. You think everyone who gets close to me just wants money? You've thought that about every single person I've ever dated. But you're wrong about Vanessa. She's different. Then let me meet her, Margaret said firmly. Before you propose. Just one dinner. If she's as wonderful as you say, what's the harm? Daniel stared at his mother. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel said, Fine. Dinner. Tomorrow night. At the house. But Mom, please just try to like her. Don't interrogate her. Don't investigate her. Just give her a chance. Margaret nodded. I promise to be fair. After Daniel left, Margaret sat alone in her office. She looked out her window at the city below. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. That little voice in her head was screaming now. Not whispering. Screaming. Danger. 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 But Margaret had no proof. Only feelings. Only instincts. And tomorrow night, she would finally meet the woman who had stolen her son's heart. The next evening, Margaret stood in her dining room, making sure everything was perfect. The long table was set with her best dishes. White plates with gold edges that cost more than most people's cars. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. Fresh flowers sat in the center of the table, filling the room with the smell of roses. Margaret wore a simple black dress and her favorite pearl necklace, the one Thomas had given her on their last anniversary together. She touched the pearls and took a deep breath. The doorbell rang. Margaret's heart jumped. She walked to the front door and opened it. Daniel stood there, smiling. And next to him was Vanessa. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Vanessa was beautiful. Not just pretty, beautiful. She had long dark hair that fell in perfect waves down her back. Her skin was smooth and glowing. Her dress was elegant but not too fancy, a blue dress that matched her eyes. She wore small diamond earrings and carried a designer purse. But it was her smile that struck Margaret the most. It was perfect. Too perfect. Like she'd practiced it in a mirror 1,000 times. Mom, this is Vanessa, Daniel said, his voice full of pride. Vanessa, this is my mother, Margaret Blackwood. Vanessa stepped forward and held out her hand. Mrs. Blackwood, it's such an honor to finally meet you. Daniel has told me so much about you. You're even more impressive in person. Margaret shook her hand. Vanessa's grip was firm but not too strong. Her hand was soft, like she'd never worked a hard day in her life. Please call me Margaret, she said, watching Vanessa's face carefully. Come in. Dinner is ready. They walked into the dining room and sat down. Daniel sat at one end of the table, Margaret at the other, and Vanessa in the middle. The cook brought out the first course, a fancy soup with vegetables and cream. This is delicious, Vanessa said after her first spoonful. You have an amazing chef. Thank you, Margaret said. So, Vanessa, Daniel tells me you're an art consultant. How did you get into that line of work? Vanessa smiled that perfect smile again. Oh, I've always loved art. My parents took me to museums when I was little. I studied art history in college and just fell in love with it. Now I get to help people find beautiful pieces for their homes. It's like matchmaking but with paintings. She laughed. It was a pretty laugh like bells ringing. Margaret nodded. And where did you go to college? A small school on the East Coast. You probably haven't heard of it. Margaret noticed that Vanessa didn't say the name of the school. Interesting. And your family? Are they in the art business too? For just a second, just one tiny second, something flickered across Vanessa's face. Something dark. But then the smile came back. My parents passed away a few years ago, Vanessa said softly. Car accident. I don't have any brothers or sisters, so it's just me now. I'm so sorry, Margaret said, and she meant it. She knew what it felt like to lose people you loved. Thank you. It was hard, but I've learned to move forward. And meeting Daniel has brought so much joy back into my life. Vanessa reached across the table and put her hand on Daniel's. He's the best thing that ever happened to me. Daniel's face turned red, but he was smiling so big. You're the best thing that happened to me, he said back. Margaret watched them hold hands across the table. She saw the way Daniel looked at Vanessa, like she hung the moon and stars in the sky. But she also saw the way Vanessa looked around the room. Her eyes moved from the expensive chandelier to the paintings on the wall to the silver candlesticks on the table. She was looking at everything, studying everything, like she was adding up prices in her head. The cook brought out the main course, chicken with fancy sauce and roasted vegetables. "So, Vanessa," Margaret said, cutting her chicken, "what do you think about marriage? Do you want to get married someday?" Daniel choked on his water. "Mom?" But Vanessa just laughed. "It's okay, Daniel. It's a fair question." She looked at Margaret. "Yes, I do want to get married. When I find the right person. Someone who loves me for who I am, not what I have. Someone who will be my partner in life." "And what about children?" Margaret asked. "I'd love to have children someday. A big family, lots of love and laughter." All the right answers. Vanessa had all the right answers. They ate in silence for a moment. Then Vanessa said, "Mrs. Blackwood, Margaret, I want you to know something. I know Daniel comes from a wealthy family. I know people might think I'm interested in him because of money. But that's not true. I fell in love with Daniel because he's kind and funny and smart. He makes me laugh. He makes me feel safe. The money doesn't matter to me." Margaret put down her fork. "The money doesn't matter?" "Not at all," Vanessa said firmly. "I make my own money. I have my own career. I don't need anyone to take care of me. I just want someone to love." Margaret looked at Vanessa's designer dress, her expensive purse, her diamond earrings. If she made her own money, why did everything she owned look brand new and top of the line? That little voice in Margaret's head got louder. But Margaret smiled. "That's good to hear. Daniel deserves someone who loves him for himself." The rest of dinner went smoothly. They talked about art, about travel, about books. Vanessa was charming. She laughed at all of Margaret's jokes. She asked questions about Margaret's business. She complimented the food, the house, everything. She was perfect. Too perfect. After dessert, Daniel and Vanessa got ready to leave. "Thank you so much for dinner," Vanessa said, hugging Margaret at the door. "I hope we can do this again soon. I really want to get to know you better." "Of course," Margaret said. "Anytime." She watched them walk to Daniel's car. She watched Daniel open the door for Vanessa. She watched them drive away. Then Margaret closed the door and stood alone in her big empty house. She walked back to the dining room and looked at Vanessa's seat. Something was bothering her. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Margaret thought about everything Vanessa had said. The perfect answers. The sad story about her dead parents. The claim that money didn't matter. And then Margaret remembered something. When Vanessa talked about her parents dying, her eyes didn't get wet. She didn't blink fast or look away. She just said it like she was reading from a script. Normal people get emotional when they talk about losing their parents. Even years later. But Vanessa's face had been calm. Practiced. Margaret stood alone in her big empty house, looking at the empty dining room. All those perfect answers. That perfect smile. That perfect story. Something felt wrong. But Margaret had no proof. Just a feeling in her gut that wouldn't go away. She thought about calling someone to investigate Vanessa. But then she stopped herself. What would she tell Daniel if he found out? He already thought she was too controlling, too suspicious. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe Vanessa really was just a nice woman who loved her son. Maybe. Margaret touched her pearl necklace and sighed. She would watch. She would wait. She would pay attention. But she would not investigate. Not yet. Because if she was wrong, she would push Daniel away forever. And if she was right, well, the truth would come out eventually. It always did. Margaret turned off the lights and went upstairs to bed. But that little voice in her head kept whispering all night long. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. 2 weeks later, Daniel came to Margaret's office with news that made her heart sink. She said yes. Daniel practically shouted as he burst through the door. Mom, Vanessa said yes. We're getting married. Margaret looked up from her desk. She tried to smile, but her face felt frozen. Congratulations, sweetheart, she said slowly. When are you thinking? Next year? In the spring, perhaps? Daniel shook his head, his eyes shining with excitement. No, Mom. We don't want to wait. We're thinking 3 months. Maybe even sooner. Why wait when you know it's right? 3 months. Margaret's stomach twisted into a knot. Daniel, that's very fast. Planning a wedding takes time. And you two have only known each other for 6 months. Maybe you should. I knew you'd say that. Daniel's smile faded. I knew you'd find a reason for us to slow down. I'm not trying to stop you. I just think you don't like her. Daniel's voice got hard. Just admit it, Mom. You don't like Vanessa. Margaret stood up and walked around her desk. Daniel, I barely know her. I met her once for one dinner. How can I like or dislike someone I don't know? Exactly. You don't know her. But you've already decided she's not good enough for me. That's not true. Then what is it? Daniel's voice got louder. Why do you always do this? Why can't you just be happy for me? Margaret took a deep breath. She had to be careful. If she pushed too hard, she would lose him. I am happy for you, she said quietly. I just want to make sure you're making the right choice. Marriage is forever, Daniel. It's not something to rush into. I'm not rushing. I know what I want. I know who I want to spend my life with. Daniel looked at his mother with sad eyes. I thought you'd understand. Dad proposed to you after only 4 months of dating, didn't he? Margaret felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. That was different. How? How was it different? Because we had nothing to lose, Margaret wanted to say. Because we were both poor. Because no one wanted anything from us except love. But she couldn't say that. Not without making Daniel angry. Your father and I, we were very young, Margaret said instead. We made mistakes. I just don't want you to make the same ones. Marrying Vanessa isn't a mistake. Daniel's jaw tightened. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. And I'm going to marry her with or without your blessing. He turned to walk out of the office. Daniel, wait. But he was already gone. The door slammed behind him. Margaret stood alone in her office. Through the big windows she could see the whole city spread out below her. All those buildings. All those people. All that power. But she couldn't even convince her own son to slow down. She sat back down at her desk and put her head in her hands. That night Daniel called her. Mom, I'm sorry I got angry, he said. His voice was calmer now. I know you're just trying to protect me. You've always protected me. But I need you to trust me on this. Vanessa is good. She's real. She loves me. Margaret closed her eyes. I know you believe that. It's not just belief. It's truth. And I need you to be there, Mom. At the wedding. Walking me down the aisle. You're all the family I have. Please. How could she say no to that? How could she refuse her only son? Of course I'll be there, Margaret said softly. I'll always be there for you. Thank you. Daniel's voice cracked a little. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything. After she hung up, Margaret sat in the dark living room of her mansion. The house felt too big, too empty, too quiet. She wanted to stop the wedding. She wanted to scream and shout and forbid it. But she had no proof. No evidence. Just a bad feeling. And you couldn't stop a wedding because of a feeling. The next 3 months passed in a blur. Vanessa planned everything. She picked the venue, a huge, expensive hotel in the city. She picked the flowers, white roses, thousands of them. She picked the food, the music, the decorations. Everything was perfect. Everything was expensive. Daniel paid for all of it, of course. He was so happy, so excited. He didn't even notice how much money was flowing out of his bank account. But Margaret noticed. She also noticed other things. She noticed that Vanessa never talked about her old friends. She never mentioned anyone from her past. No college roommates. No childhood friends. No one. She noticed that Vanessa always steered conversations away from her life before Daniel. If anyone asked about her job, she gave vague answers. If anyone asked about her family, she changed the subject. She noticed that Vanessa looked at Daniel's expensive watch, his designer clothes, his luxury car the same way she looked at everything else, like she was calculating their worth. But whenever Margaret tried to say something to Daniel, he got defensive. You're imagining things, Mom. You're being paranoid, Mom. You just don't want me to be happy, Mom. So Margaret stopped trying. She watched quietly. She attended the wedding planning meetings. She smiled when she was supposed to smile. But inside that voice kept screaming. Danger. 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 Finally, the wedding day arrived. It was a beautiful Saturday in June. The sun was shining. The hotel ballroom was decorated with white roses and gold ribbons. 300 guests filled the chairs. Business partners, politicians, celebrities, people Daniel had known his whole life. Margaret sat in the front row, wearing a navy blue dress and her pearl necklace. She watched as the music started. She watched as the bridesmaids walked down the aisle in their pink dresses. Then Vanessa appeared. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. Her white dress sparkled with thousands of tiny crystals. Her veil flowed behind her like a cloud. She carried a bouquet of white roses. Everyone gasped. Cameras flashed. Someone whispered, "She's beautiful." Margaret watched Vanessa walk down that aisle, her face glowing with a perfect smile. And Margaret thought, she's won. Vanessa reached the front where Daniel stood waiting. He was crying happy tears. He looked at Vanessa like she was the only person in the world. The priest began to speak. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Margaret's hands gripped the edge of her seat. She wanted to stand up. She wanted to shout, "Stop. Don't do this." But she stayed silent. Because what could she say? "I have a bad feeling about this woman." Everyone would think she was crazy. Everyone would think she was just a jealous mother who couldn't let go. "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace," the priest said. The room went silent. Everyone looked around. Margaret felt hundreds of eyes turned toward her. They all knew she had doubts. They all wondered if she would speak up. Margaret opened her mouth. But no words came out. She looked at Daniel's happy face. She thought about losing him forever if she ruined this day. Margaret closed her mouth and looked down at her lap. "Very well," the priest said. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Daniel kissed Vanessa. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. And Margaret sat there watching her worst fears come true, unable to do anything to stop it. At the reception, Vanessa danced with Daniel. She smiled and laughed and thanked everyone for coming. She played the role of the perfect bride. Margaret stood in the corner watching. Waiting. That voice in her head was quieter now. Because what was the point of warning her anymore? It was too late. The marriage had happened. And now all Margaret could do was pray that she was wrong. After the wedding, things changed. Daniel and Vanessa moved into a huge penthouse apartment downtown, one of the most expensive in the city. Vanessa decorated it with expensive furniture, designer curtains, and original paintings that cost more than most people made in a year. "Isn't it beautiful, Mom?" Daniel said when Margaret came to visit for the first time. "Vanessa has such good taste." Margaret walked through the rooms looking at all the luxury. "It's very nice," she said quietly. "How much did all this cost?" "Don't worry about it," Daniel said with a laugh. "We can afford it." But Margaret did worry. Because she knew exactly how much money Daniel had. And she knew that Vanessa was spending it very, very fast. Over the next few months, Margaret watched as things got worse. Vanessa quit her job as an art consultant. "I don't need to work anymore," she told Daniel. "I want to focus on our home, on our life together." She bought new clothes every week. Dresses, shoes, purses, jewelry. She went to expensive spas. She hired a personal trainer, a chef, a housekeeper. Daniel didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he didn't care. He was so happy to have Vanessa as his wife that he gave her whatever she wanted. Margaret tried to talk to him about it once. "Daniel, sweetheart, maybe you and Vanessa should talk about a budget. I know you have money, but—" "Mom, please," Daniel interrupted. "Vanessa isn't spending too much. She deserves nice things. She makes me happy. Isn't that worth it?" Margaret wanted to say, "Making you happy shouldn't cost $500,000 in 6 months. But she kept quiet. Because every time she questioned Vanessa, Daniel pulled away from her a little more. They used to have dinner together every week. Now it was once a month. Then once every 2 months. They used to talk on the phone every day. Now Daniel barely called. When Margaret asked to visit, Daniel always had an excuse. "Vanessa isn't feeling well. We're busy with plans. Maybe next week." It was like Vanessa was slowly cutting Daniel off from his mother. Like a pair of scissors, snip by snip, cutting the thread that connected them. And there was nothing Margaret could do about it. 1 year passed. Then 14 months. Then 16. Then one cold morning in December, Margaret's phone rang at 6 o'clock. She was already awake, working in her home office. She picked up the phone without looking at the caller ID. "Hello? Mrs. Blackwood?" It was a woman's voice, shaking and crying. "Mrs. Blackwood, this is Vanessa. Something terrible has happened." Margaret's whole body went cold. "What? What happened?" "It's Daniel." Vanessa was sobbing so hard she could barely speak. He collapsed this morning. I called 911, but—" "Mrs. Blackwood, you need to come to the hospital right away. Please hurry." Margaret didn't remember the drive to the hospital. One moment she was in her house, the next she was running through the emergency room doors. "My son," she told the nurse at the desk. "Daniel Blackwood. Where is he?" The nurse's face went pale. "I'll get the doctor." A young doctor came out, his face serious and sad. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm so sorry. We did everything we could, but—" "No." Margaret shook her head. No, don't say it. Your son passed away about 30 minutes ago. His heart just stopped. We tried to revive him, but there was nothing we could do. The world tilted sideways. Margaret grabbed the desk to keep from falling. That's impossible, she whispered. Daniel is healthy. He exercises. He eats right. He's only 29 years old. Sometimes these things happen, the doctor said softly. A sudden cardiac event. An undetected heart problem. It's rare, but it happens. I want to see him. The doctor led her to a small room. And there, on a bed with white sheets, lay Daniel. Her son. Her only child. Her whole world. He looked like he was sleeping. His face was peaceful. But when Margaret touched his hand, it was cold. So cold. Margaret stood there holding her dead son's hand, and she couldn't cry. She couldn't scream. She couldn't do anything. She was frozen like a statue made of ice. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She heard crying. Vanessa rushed into the room and threw herself across Daniel's body. No. No. My husband. My love. Why did you leave me? Vanessa sobbed loudly, dramatically. Nurses came in to comfort her. Someone brought her tissues and water. Margaret just stood there, still holding Daniel's cold hand. And that's when she noticed something. Vanessa was crying, sobbing, making all the right sounds. But when Margaret looked closely at Vanessa's face, she didn't see any tears. Vanessa's eyes were dry. She was fake crying. Pretending. Margaret's grief suddenly turned into something else. Something sharp and hard and burning. Suspicion. A healthy 29-year-old man doesn't just die in his sleep. Not without a reason. Margaret looked at her son's peaceful face. She looked at Vanessa's fake tears. And that little voice in her head, the one that had been screaming danger for 18 months, suddenly became crystal clear. Vanessa killed him. Margaret didn't know how she knew. She had no proof. But she knew it in her bones, in her blood, in every cell of her body. Vanessa had killed her son. And Margaret was going to prove it. The funeral was planned for 1 week later. 7 days. That's all Margaret had to find proof before they buried her son. The day after Daniel died, Margaret sat in her office with Marcus, her most trusted assistant. Marcus had worked for her for 15 years. He was smart, loyal, and knew how to find information that other people wanted to hide. I need you to investigate Vanessa, Margaret said, her voice flat and cold. I need to know everything about her. And I mean everything. Marcus pulled out a notebook. What exactly are you looking for, Mrs. Blackwood? The truth. Margaret leaned forward. Daniel's doctors say he died of sudden heart failure. But Daniel was healthy. He had checkups every 6 months. His heart was fine. You think there's something suspicious about his death? I know there is. Margaret's jaw tightened. I want you to get Daniel's medical records from the hospital. I want to know exactly what they found in his body. I want toxicology reports. I want everything. That might be difficult. Those records are private. I don't care if it's difficult. I don't care if it's expensive. I don't care if you have to break rules. Get me those records. Marcus nodded. What else? I want you to investigate Vanessa's background. Where she really came from. Where she really went to school. Who her parents really were. She told us they died in a car accident, but I want proof. I want death certificates. I want accident reports. Margaret stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city looked gray and cold. And I want to know about her past relationships, Margaret continued. Vanessa is 28 years old. She must have dated other men before Daniel. Find out who they were. Find out what happened to them. You think she's done this before? Margaret turned to look at Marcus. Yes. I think my son wasn't the first rich man Vanessa has been with. And I think something bad happened to the others too. Marcus wrote everything down. I'll start immediately. But Mrs. Blackwood, if Vanessa really did something to Daniel, this is dangerous. If she finds out you're investigating her, let her find out, Margaret said coldly. I'm not afraid of her. She should be afraid of me. After Marcus left, Margaret sat alone in her office. She pulled out her phone and looked at the last text message Daniel had sent her. It was from 3 days before he died. Mom, can we have dinner this weekend? I miss you. Love you. Margaret had been too busy with a business meeting. She'd replied, maybe next week, sweetheart. I have a big deal closing. Next week never came. Margaret closed her eyes. A tear rolled down her cheek, the first tear she'd cried since Daniel died. I'm sorry, she whispered to her dead son. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. But I'm here now. I'm going to make this right. I promise. Over the next 3 days, Marcus worked like a man possessed. He called in favors. He paid people for information. He dug through records and files and documents. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth started to emerge. On the 3rd day, Marcus came to Margaret's house. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. He carried a thick folder full of papers. "You were right," he said quietly. "About everything." Margaret's heart started beating faster. "Tell me." Marcus opened the folder. First, Vanessa's background. Her real name is Vanessa Cole. She didn't go to a small college on the East Coast. She dropped out of community college after 1 semester. Her parents aren't dead. They're alive and living in a trailer park in Nevada. I called them. They said they haven't spoken to Vanessa in 8 years. Margaret's hands clenched into fists. She lied about everything. That's not all. Marcus pulled out more papers. I found 3 men from Vanessa's past. All of them were wealthy. All of them dated Vanessa for less than 2 years. And all 3 of them are now dead. Margaret's blood went cold. Dead? How? The first one, Michael Peterson, died 5 years ago. Heart attack. He was 32 years old and supposedly healthy. He left Vanessa $50,000 in his will. The second one, James Crawford, died 3 years ago. Sudden illness. Doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. He got sicker and sicker, and then one day his organs just failed. He was 35. He left Vanessa his house and his car. The third one, Robert Chin, died 18 months ago, right before Vanessa met Daniel. Cause of death, unexplained heart failure. He was 30 years old. He left Vanessa $100,000. Margaret felt sick. 3 men. All young. All healthy. All dead. And all of them left Vanessa money or property. Marcus pulled out another paper. I also got Daniel's medical records. The hospital did a basic toxicology screen, but they weren't looking for anything unusual. They assumed it was natural causes. But I hired a private lab to run more tests on the samples the hospital kept. They found traces of something called digitalis in Daniel's blood. What's digitalis? It's a drug made from foxglove plants. In small doses, it's used to treat heart problems. But in large doses, it causes heart attacks. And the worst part? It's very hard to detect. It looks like a natural heart attack. Margaret stood up. Her whole body was shaking with rage. She poisoned him. It looks that way. Over time, small doses of digitalis can build up in the body. It would have made Daniel feel weak, tired, sick. But he probably thought he just had the flu or was working too hard. And then one final dose would stop his heart completely. Marcus nodded. Exactly. Margaret walked to her desk and pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police. Wait. Marcus held up his hand. Mrs. Blackwood, we have evidence, but it's not enough for an arrest. Not yet. The digitalis was barely detectable. A good lawyer could argue it was a testing error or contamination. And the 3 dead men? That's suspicious, but it's not proof. We need more. What do we need? We need Vanessa to make a mistake. We need her to slip up. Or we need someone who knows what she did to come forward. Margaret thought about the funeral in 4 days. Hundreds of people would be there. Vanessa would play the grieving widow. She would cry her fake tears. She would collect sympathy and probably collect Daniel's money too. Unless Margaret stopped her. I have an idea, Margaret said slowly. But it's risky. What is it? Margaret looked at Marcus with hard, determined eyes. We're going to use the funeral to expose her. In front of everyone. Vanessa thinks she's gotten away with it. She thinks no one suspects her. But we're going to prove to the whole world what she did. How? We're going to make her confess. The next day, Margaret made 3 important phone calls. The first call was to Detective Sarah Martinez, a police detective Margaret had helped years ago when the detective's mother needed an expensive surgery. Margaret had paid for it, asking nothing in return. Now Margaret needed a favor. Detective Martinez, I need your help, Margaret said. I believe my son was murdered by his wife. I have evidence, but I need the police there when I expose her. Mrs. Blackwood, if you have evidence of murder, you should bring it to the station. There's no time. The funeral is in 3 days. After that, Vanessa will inherit everything and disappear. Please, just trust me. Be at the funeral with backup. I'll show you everything then. Detective Martinez was quiet for a moment. Then she said, okay, I'll be there. But this better not be a wild goose chase. It's not. I promise. The second call was to a technology expert named David Kim. David specialized in audio and video equipment for courtrooms and investigations. "David, I need you to set up hidden microphones and cameras at my son's funeral," Margaret said. "I need to record everything that happens. Can you do that?" "Of course, Mrs. Blackwood. But recording people without their knowledge is—" "I don't care about the law right now. I care about justice. My son is dead and his killer is walking free. Will you help me or not?" David sighed. "I'll help you. Where's the funeral?" "The Grand Hotel ballroom. I'll get you access to set up the night before." The third call was the hardest. Margaret called Vanessa. Vanessa answered on the first ring. Her voice sounded soft and sad. "Hello? Vanessa, it's Margaret." "Oh, Margaret." Vanessa sniffled like she'd been crying. "I'm so glad you called. I've been so lost without Daniel. I don't know what to do." Margaret wanted to scream at her. She wanted to call her a liar and a murderer. But she kept her voice calm and gentle. "I know this is hard for you, dear," Margaret said. "I was wondering if you'd like to speak at the funeral. Say a few words about Daniel. I think people would like to hear from you." "Really?" Vanessa sounded surprised. "You want me to speak?" "Of course. You were his wife. You knew him better than anyone." Margaret forced the words out even though they tasted like poison. "I think it would be beautiful if you shared your memories of him." "Thank you, Margaret. That means so much to me. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I hope we can support each other through this terrible time." "Yes," Margaret said coldly. "I hope so too." After she hung up, Margaret sat very still. Her hands were shaking. She'd just invited her son's killer to speak at his funeral. She just pretended to be kind to the woman who murdered Daniel. But it was necessary. Vanessa needed to feel safe. She needed to think she'd won. That's when people made mistakes. That's when they told the truth. The night before the funeral, David Kim set up his equipment at the Grand Hotel. He placed tiny cameras in the corners of the ballroom where no one would notice them. He hid microphones in the flower arrangements on the stage. "Everything will be recorded," David told Margaret. "Audio and video. Whatever happens tomorrow will have proof." "Good," Margaret said. "Thank you." That night, Margaret didn't sleep. She sat in Daniel's old bedroom in her house. The room she'd kept exactly the way it was when he was a boy. His baseball trophies were still on the shelf. His books were still on the desk. His pictures were still on the walls. Margaret picked up a photo of Daniel when he was 7 years old. He was missing his 2 front teeth and grinning at the camera holding a toy car. "Tomorrow," Margaret whispered to the photo. "Tomorrow I'm going to make her pay for what she did to you. I promise." She put the photo down and pulled out the brown envelope Marcus had given her. Inside were all the documents. The medical records showing digitalis in Daniel's blood. The death certificates of the 3 men who died after dating Vanessa. The proof that Vanessa had lied about everything. Her parents, her education, her past. Margaret had one more thing in the envelope too. Something Marcus had found just that morning. A witness. A woman named Linda Chin, the sister of Robert Chin, the 3rd man who died. Linda had contacted Marcus after hearing about Daniel's death on the news. She recognized Vanessa's photo. "I always knew Vanessa killed my brother," Linda had told Marcus. "But I couldn't prove it. The police said it was natural causes. But Robert was healthy. He was careful. He would never just die like that." Linda had agreed to come to the funeral. She had agreed to confront Vanessa if Margaret needed her to. Margaret tucked the envelope into her purse. Everything was ready. Tomorrow the truth would come out. Tomorrow justice would be served. Or tomorrow Margaret would lose everything trying. The next day Margaret stood at the front of the funeral hall, staring at the coffin that held her only son. Hundreds of people filled the room. Cameras. Reporters. Politicians. Everyone who was anyone had come to say goodbye to Daniel Blackwood. And there, in the front row, sat Vanessa in her black dress, dabbing at her dry eyes with a white tissue. Margaret's hand gripped the brown envelope in her purse. Inside were all the answers. All the proof. The priest finished his opening prayer. Then he looked at Margaret. "Mrs. Blackwood has asked to say a few words before we hear from Daniel's wife." Margaret walked slowly to the microphone at the front. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She looked out at the crowd. She saw Detective Martinez standing near the back door with 2 other police officers. She saw David Kim in the corner making sure the cameras were recording everything. She saw Vanessa in the front row, looking up at her with those fake sad eyes. Margaret took a deep breath. "Thank you all for coming," she began. Her voice was steady and strong. "My son Daniel was a good man. A kind man. A trusting man. sometimes too trusting. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Daniel believed that people were good, Margaret continued. He believed in love. He believed that if you gave people your heart, they would cherish it. Margaret paused. The room was completely silent. But sometimes, Margaret said, her voice getting harder, people take advantage of trust. Sometimes, people pretend to love you when all they really love is your money. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People started whispering to each other. Vanessa stood up. Mrs. Blackwood, I don't think this is the appropriate time. Sit down, Vanessa, Margaret said coldly. I'm not finished. Vanessa's face went pale. But she sat back down. Margaret pulled the envelope from her purse and held it up. My son did not die of natural causes, she said loudly so everyone could hear. Daniel was murdered. Poisoned. And I have proof. The room exploded. People jumped to their feet. Reporters rushed forward with cameras. Voices shouted questions all at once. Murder? What proof? Is this real? Vanessa stood up again, her face white as snow. This is insane. Margaret, your grief is making you confused. You don't know what you're saying? I know exactly what I'm saying, Margaret cut her off. Her voice was like ice. And I have proof. Margaret pulled out the first document from her envelope. This is Daniel's toxicology report. It shows traces of digitalis in his blood. Digitalis is a poison that causes heart attacks. She held up another paper. This is a record of all the medications in your apartment. You had digitalis there, Vanessa. Why would you have heart medication when neither you nor Daniel had heart problems? Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Margaret wasn't finished. She pulled out more papers. But that's not all. My investigators found out that you lied about everything, Vanessa. Your parents aren't dead. They're alive in Nevada. You didn't go to college. You dropped out after one semester. You were never really an art consultant. That was all a lie. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed. Everyone was staring at Vanessa now. Stop this. Vanessa shouted. Her voice was shaking. You're trying to destroy me because you never liked me. You never wanted Daniel to marry me. You're right, Margaret said. I didn't want him to marry you. Because I knew something was wrong. My instinct told me you were dangerous. And I was right. Margaret held up 3 more papers. These are death certificates. Michael Peterson died 5 years ago. James Crawford died 3 years ago. Robert Chin died 18 months ago. All of them were your boyfriends, Vanessa. All of them were wealthy. And all of them died young of sudden heart problems. The room went silent. Everyone stared at Vanessa with horror. And all of them, Margaret continued, left you money in their wills. Just like Daniel did. Vanessa's face changed. The sad widow act disappeared completely. Her eyes turned hard and cold. You can't prove any of this, Vanessa hissed. Those men died of natural causes. The doctor said so. And even if Daniel had digitalis in his blood, that doesn't mean I gave it to him. You're right, Margaret said calmly. That's why I brought someone else to talk to you. Margaret nodded to the back of the room. A woman stood up, a Chinese woman in her 30s with short black hair. This is Linda Chin, Margaret said. Robert's sister. Linda walked to the front of the room. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was strong. I knew you killed my brother, Linda said, looking straight at Vanessa. I told the police, but they didn't believe me. They said Robert died of natural causes. But I knew better. Robert was healthy. He exercised. He ate well. And then he met you. Linda's voice got louder. After he started dating you, he got sick. Tired all the time. Weak. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. And then one day his heart just stopped. Just like that. Tears ran down Linda's face. You killed him. And when you inherited his money, you disappeared. I tried to find you, but you were gone. And now you've done it again. You killed this woman's son just like you killed my brother. Vanessa's face twisted with rage. This is ridiculous. You have no proof. None of this would hold up in court. Maybe not, Margaret said. But I don't need a court right now. I just need you to tell the truth. Margaret stepped closer to Vanessa. Did you poison my son? Did you kill Daniel to get his money? No. Vanessa shouted. But her voice was too loud, too desperate. Then explain the digitalis, Margaret pressed. Explain why 3 of your ex-boyfriends are dead. Explain why you lied about everything, your parents, your education, your entire life. I don't have to explain anything to you. Yes, you do. Margaret's voice cracked with emotion. You took my son from me, my only child. He loved you. He trusted you. And you killed him. The room was completely silent now. Everyone watched Vanessa, waiting to see what she would say. Vanessa looked around at all the faces staring at her. She saw the cameras recording. She saw the police officers moving closer to the front. She saw that she was trapped. And then something inside her seemed to break. Vanessa laughed. It was a cold, bitter laugh that made everyone's skin crawl. You want the truth? Vanessa said, her voice hard and mean. Fine. Yes. I killed him. I killed Daniel. I killed Robert. I killed James and Michael too. I killed all of them. Gasps filled the room. Someone screamed. But Vanessa kept talking like she couldn't stop herself. They were all the same. Rich, stupid men who thought they were special. They thought I loved them. They thought they were different from everyone else. Vanessa's face twisted into an ugly sneer. But they were all just wallets to me. Easy targets. Give them a pretty smile, tell them what they want to hear, and they'll give you everything. Their money. Their trust. Their lives. Daniel was the easiest one, Vanessa continued, her voice full of hate. He was so desperate for love. So desperate to believe someone could want him for more than his money. It was pathetic. Margaret felt like someone had stabbed her in the heart. But she stood strong. So you admit it, Margaret said quietly. You murdered my son. Vanessa smiled, a cold, terrible smile. Yes. And you know what? He never even suspected. Not once. Even when he was dying, even when his heart was failing, he looked at me with those trusting eyes and said, I love you. What an idiot. Margaret's hands clenched into fists. Every part of her wanted to attack Vanessa, to hurt her the way she'd hurt Daniel. But Margaret stayed still. Because Detective Martinez was already moving forward with handcuffs. Vanessa Cole, the detective said, you're under arrest for the murder of Daniel Blackwood. You have the right to remain silent. Vanessa's smile disappeared. Her eyes went wide as she realized what she'd done. Wait, no, I didn't mean. Too late, Margaret said coldly. You confessed. In front of 300 witnesses. And it's all on camera. 2 police officers grabbed Vanessa's arms. She started screaming and fighting, but they held her tight. You set me up. Vanessa shrieked at Margaret. You tricked me. Yes, Margaret said. I did. Just like you tricked my son. The police dragged Vanessa out of the funeral hall. She screamed and cursed the whole way. Everyone watched in shock and horror. When Vanessa was gone, the room stayed silent. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew what to do. Margaret turned to look at Daniel's coffin. She walked to it slowly and placed her hand on the smooth wood. I got her, Margaret whispered. Justice is coming, my sweet boy. Justice is coming. Then finally Margaret let herself cry. The funeral ended that day without a burial. The police needed to do more tests on Daniel's body. They needed to gather evidence for the trial. Margaret went home to her big empty mansion. She walked through the quiet rooms and felt the silence press down on her like a heavy blanket. Daniel was gone. Really gone. And even though Margaret had caught his killer, it didn't bring him back. Nothing would bring him back. Margaret sat in her living room as the sun went down. She didn't turn on any lights. She just sat in the darkness holding a photo of Daniel. Her phone rang constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Friends wanted to check on her. Business partners wanted to talk. Margaret ignored them all. Finally, on the 3rd day after the funeral, Marcus came to visit. Mrs. Blackwood, he said gently, I thought you should know. The police have finished their investigation. They found digitalis pills hidden in Vanessa's jewelry box. They found records showing she'd been researching poisons for years. And they talked to people from her past. Friends, co-workers, neighbors. Everyone says the same thing. Vanessa was obsessed with money and willing to do anything to get it. Margaret nodded slowly. What about the other men? Michael, James, and Robert? The police are reopening all 3 cases. With Vanessa's confession and the new evidence, they're treating all 3 deaths as murders now. Vanessa will be charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. Good, Margaret said quietly. Marcus sat down in the chair across from her. Mrs. Blackwood, you did it. You got justice for Daniel. You stopped a killer who might have hurt more people. But Daniel is still dead, Margaret said, her voice breaking. I was right about Vanessa from the very beginning, Marcus. I knew something was wrong the first time Daniel told me about her. I felt it in my bones. But I didn't act on it. I let him marry her anyway. You couldn't have stopped him. Daniel was an adult. He made his own choices. I should have tried harder. Margaret's voice got loud. I should have investigated her before the wedding. I should have shown Daniel the truth about who she really was. Maybe if I had, he'd still be alive. Margaret put her face in her hands and sobbed. All the guilt she'd been holding inside came pouring out. This is my fault, she cried. I failed him. I failed my son. Marcus moved to sit next to her. Mrs. Blackwood, listen to me. This is not your fault. Vanessa is a professional killer. She's been doing this for years. She knew how to manipulate people. She knew how to hide. Even if you'd investigated her before the wedding, she might have been careful enough that you wouldn't have found anything. But I should have tried. You did try, Marcus said firmly. You warned Daniel. You told him to slow down. You expressed your concerns. But he was in love. And when people are in love, they don't always listen to logic. That's not your fault. That's just being human. Margaret wiped her eyes. Then why does it hurt so much? Because you're his mother. And mothers always blame themselves when their children get hurt, even when it's not their fault. They sat together in silence for a long moment. Finally, Margaret said, Tell me about the trial. When will it start? Probably in 6 months. But with Vanessa's confession on camera, with all the evidence, and with witnesses from her past coming forward, the prosecutor says it's an open and shut case. Vanessa will spend the rest of her life in prison. Margaret nodded. Good. I want to be there. At the trial. I want to look her in the eyes when they sentence her. I'll make sure you get a seat in the front row. 6 months later, Margaret sat in a courtroom wearing a simple black dress and her pearl necklace. In front of her, Vanessa sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange prison jumpsuit. Her beautiful hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore no makeup. She looked tired and small and defeated. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecutor showed the video of Vanessa's confession at the funeral. He brought in experts who explained how digitalis works. He showed evidence of the poison found in Vanessa's apartment. He brought Linda Chin and other witnesses who testified about the suspicious deaths of the other men. Vanessa's lawyer tried to argue that Margaret had manipulated Vanessa into confessing. He tried to say the evidence was planted. He tried everything he could. But it wasn't enough. After 2 weeks, the jury went to deliberate. They came back in less than 3 hours. We find the defendant, Vanessa Cole, guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted with noise. Reporters scribbled in their notebooks. People cheered and cried. Margaret just sat very still, watching Vanessa's face. Vanessa didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared straight ahead with empty eyes like a doll that had stopped working. The judge banged his gavel. Order. Order in the court. When everyone was quiet, the judge looked at Vanessa. Vanessa Cole, you have been found guilty of murdering 4 innocent men for financial gain. These were calculated, cold-blooded killings. You showed no remorse. You showed no humanity. Therefore, I sentence you to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison. The judge banged his gavel again. This court is adjourned. Police officers led Vanessa away. As she walked past Margaret, their eyes met for just a moment. Margaret expected to feel satisfaction. She expected to feel happy that justice had been served. But all she felt was empty. Because no amount of justice would bring Daniel back. After the trial, Margaret returned to her normal life. She went back to running her companies. She went back to business meetings and deals and making money. But everything felt different now. The big mansion felt too empty. The fancy office felt too cold. The expensive cars and clothes and jewelry, none of it mattered anymore. Because the one person Margaret had built it all for was gone. One evening, 3 months after the trial, Margaret drove to the cemetery where Daniel was buried. She brought fresh white roses, Daniel's favorite flowers. She stood at his grave and read the headstone. Daniel Thomas Blackwood, beloved son taken too soon. Hi, sweetheart, Margaret said softly, placing the roses on the grave. I'm sorry I haven't visited in a while. Work has been busy. The wind blew gently through the trees. Birds sang in the distance. Vanessa is in prison now, Margaret continued. She'll never hurt anyone again. I made sure of that. Margaret sat down on the grass next to the grave, not caring that her expensive dress was getting dirty. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, she said. About the mistakes I made. About the things I should have done differently. She touched the cold marble of the headstone. I should have investigated Vanessa before you married her. I should have pushed harder to make you see the truth. But I was afraid. I was afraid you would hate me. I was afraid I would lose you. Margaret's voice broke. And I lost you anyway. Tears ran down her face. I'm so sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. You were my whole world and I failed you. Margaret cried there on the grass until she had no tears left. Then as the sun began to set, she stood up and brushed off her dress. I love you, my sweet boy, she whispered. I will always love you. Margaret walked back to her car. As she drove away from the cemetery, she looked at the city spread out before her. All those buildings, all that wealth, all that power. And she made a decision. 1 year after Daniel's death, Margaret stood in front of a brand new building in the heart of the city. Above the door, a sign read, "The Daniel Blackwood Foundation, protecting families from financial predators." Margaret had used half of her fortune to create the foundation. It helped people investigate potential partners before marriage. It educated young people about the dangers of gold diggers and scammers. It provided free lawyers to families who suspected their loved ones were being manipulated for money. We help people see the truth before it's too late, Margaret told the reporters at the opening ceremony. We teach people to trust their instincts. We protect them from people like Vanessa. Inside the building, Margaret had created something else too, a wall with photos and stories of Vanessa's victims. Michael Peterson, James Crawford, Robert Chin. And in the center, a large photo of Daniel, smiling his beautiful smile. Their deaths will not be forgotten, Margaret said, and their stories will save lives. After the ceremony ended, Margaret stood alone in front of Daniel's photo. I couldn't save you, she whispered, but maybe I can save someone else's child. Maybe that's how I honor your memory. She touched the photo gently like she was touching his face. I learned something through all of this, Daniel. I learned that a mother's instinct is real. That little voice inside that tells you something is wrong, it's there for a reason. And I should have listened to it sooner. Margaret took a deep breath. But I also learned that even when we fail, even when we lose everything, we can still choose to do something good with our pain. We can still choose to help others. She smiled sadly at Daniel's photo. I think you would be proud of this. You always wanted to help people. Now in your name we will. Margaret turned and walked out of the building into the sunlight. She would never stop missing Daniel. She would never stop wishing she could go back and change things. The grief would always be there, like a scar on her heart. But she would keep living. She would keep fighting. She would keep protecting people from predators like Vanessa. Because that's what mothers do. They protect. They fight. They never give up. Even when their hearts are broken. Even when their children are gone. A mother's love, and a mother's instinct, never dies. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video.